I'm not a marsh specialist, as I said. I'm coming at this really from the perspective of understanding and managing coastal flood and erosion risks through whole system thinking and beginning to understand how natural ecosystems, including marshes, can contribute to managing that. And hopefully I'll counter the sort of stereotype that Mark put forward earlier that engineers are all grumpy. So you all probably know this. Coastal flood and erosion risk is escalating on a global basis, including in Canada. Catastrophic losses, insurance losses have been spiking. This was the worst year on record so far. But we've been relatively lucky, in fact, that coastal flooding and erosion events, although we've had a few big ones in the last decade or so, have not really been major contributors to these losses yet. But looming on the horizon, of course, we've got sea level rise. And this is a bit of a double whammy because it contributes both to increasing coastal flood hazard risk, but also to coastal wetland loss. And so, you know, all of you know this, but of course there are a couple of mechanisms in which sea level rise can contribute to wetland loss. So coastal squeeze against infrastructure that we've put on the coast, and also simply this sort of rate of, or this balance between the rate of sea level rise and accretion. And so engineers love graphs with straight lines. So this is really, I think, you know, a simplistic version, maybe a precursor for the model, the Marsh model that was presented earlier. But it's an idea that basically there's this balance. So when you reach a critical rate of sea level rise relative to the tidal range at a particular site, and of course this is determined by a whole bunch of factors related to sediment, geese, whatever, then you start to tip into a regime where you can have coastal wetland loss. And so if we just take this very simple model, you know, and you run the numbers, so for BC and the tidal ranges we see around BC, you're looking at, you know, 1 meter of sea level rise starting to tip us into that range, or pushing us further in, depending on where we're at. And this is, you know, a concern from a coastal flooding perspective, because we know coastal marshes play a very important role in contributing to flood and erosion risk management that we don't always think about. So some of you may be aware of this study by Narayan et al., which looked at the impacts of coastal wetlands in the northeast US on mitigating or offsetting damages to the tune of 600 million US. In response to Superstorm Sandy. And so, you know, coastal wetlands do this by providing storage for floodwater, attenuating waves, attracting and stabilizing sediments, and also, you know, at large scales, also attenuating storm surges. So the flood risk community is interested in understanding how we can better leverage some of these benefits. And so in 2021, some of you may have seen this publication by US Army Corps of Engineers, led by an international working group. I don't know, has anyone read it? Well, I know you're lying because it's 1,000+ pages, right? So yeah. So
Which is still 100 pages.
I contributed to it and I haven't read it all, right? So, but I did want to just highlight this chapter 10 on coastal wetlands, right, which you know, which provides, I think, some nuggets of useful information that may not have been accessible to folks because of the size of this document. And, you know, I've just flagged some of them, and, you know, some of them are kind of rules of thumb about, you know, summarizing or synthesizing studies that looked at rates of attenuation of storm surge depending on scale of marshes and so on. I think the interesting one there I've just flagged is wave exposure. So, you know, there was a synthesis of studies that looked at natural coastal marsh systems tend to occur generally in areas where annual wave power is less than 0.2 kilowatts per meter of shoreline. And so for, you know, for comparison, offshore, or just offshore of Tofino, you're looking at about 30 kilowatts per meter annually, probably a lot more over the last couple of weeks. And then Sturgeon Bank is around 0.4, right? So probably at the, you know, at the sort of close to the tipping point of survival there. So anyway, some useful, potentially useful guidance in there. In 2019, we recognized that there was really a lack of guidance specific or taking into context some of the unique aspects of coastal flood risk management in Canada. And so we established a project supported by the Canadian Safety and Security Program to bring together folks engaged in work in this area to develop a knowledge base and guidance. And so we did this by really trying to apply parallel lines of research at nature-based solutions, pilot sites, including a couple of marsh restoration or construction sites, and informing the development of design guidance. And so I've just sort of pulled out some of the highlights of the research there that is maybe pertinent to marsh restoration work. A big emphasis of this was understanding wave attenuation, of course, is one of the primary mechanisms through which we achieve flood risk management benefits through marshes. And there were over 75 publications as part of this work, but I've just flagged a few. So, looking at things like planting a marsh, Atlantic Canada species in an outdoor flume and leaving that there for a year, exposing it to waves and different seasonal conditions over the year and monitoring that in controlled conditions to see how wave exposure affects things and what sort of wave attenuation we get. Field observations of wave attenuation on the East Coast, looking at immature plantings in flumes and seeing how they respond to wave conditions, looking at the impacts of on dikes with and without vegetation fields in front of them and what that means for damage to these types of conventional infrastructure. So this is the guide. It's available to download. If you can use the QR code thing, you're welcome to look at it. It's not quite as thick as the US Army Corps one, but hopefully provides some guidance specific to Canada and parts of BC. This is the structure, which I won't really go into, but it's sort of structured to provide information for different sort of target audiences. So the first section is really introductory material and more for a lay audience or maybe high-level decision makers. Section 2 gets into some of the regional community contexts, governance in Canada, and so on. Section 3 is really the meat of the technical guidance and where we start to look at different types of solutions. We've sort of categorized them based on predominantly sediment-based, vegetation-based, or hybrid solutions, although of course there's overlap. And then the last section is really about outcomes and sort of predicting and monitoring outcomes and providing guidance on things like adaptive management and so on. Won't have time to go into it, but just to flag that in each of these sort of chapters here that are sediment-based solutions, vegetation-based and hybrid, we have guidance in each of those that's sort of pertinent to marsh restoration work. So whether it's looking at how do you place sediment in coastal settings, wave attenuation and where that occurs and by how much. And looking at hybrid features, so combining marsh systems with legacy or existing dike systems to provide flood and erosion risk management function. So my key takeaways, so the first, which I think is something that we all know here, which is that healthy coastal and estuarine marshes play a key role in managing flood and erosion risk. Perhaps because it's maybe not your primary focus, I think this community and my community don't make a good job of communicating that to governments. So I think we can do a better job of learning from some of the work that's been done in the US in particular at quantifying some of those benefits that can help to make a stronger case for the restoration work that you are all doing and to do it at larger scales, like some of the examples we've just seen from the US. There is some guidance and case studies exist, but it tends to be isolated. It's not transparent. So great to see the hub that was being talked about this morning. So I think we need more of those types of initiatives to put this information out into the so that everyone can access it. I think we got to start thinking about this longer term thing as well, and rates of sea level rise versus sediment availability. So we're sort of working on the basis of this steady sea level rise, but if we get tipped into that regime where sea level rise really starts to tick up in the next 30, 40, 50 years, and we have Antarctic ice sheet collapse, then we're really going to have challenges with coastal wetland loss. So we need to start thinking a bit more about that and a bit harder about that, I think, to plan. Scale is important, particularly if we want to try and leverage benefits for storm surge attenuation. So, short sections of coastal marsh do great at attenuating waves, but storm surges really require scale to contribute. And then finally, I'll just, suggest a need for more inclusive transdisciplinary collaboration, and that's why I was so excited to have the opportunity to attend this event and learn from you all. It requires stepping outside our comfort zones a bit, so I would encourage everyone to do that. Maybe even, some of these folks attend a civil engineering conference.
We did that last night.
So thank you, and I'll mention the Coastal Zone Canada and the Nature-Based Coastal Solutions Community of Practice is a good place to bring those together. So thanks very much.